let's see if I can do this right. Okay. He's invited. Alright. My hair. Alright, you on here? Alright. Now, when he comes on the interview, you guys gotta tell me where my face is because it always goes in weird spots when I do these videos. I don't know why. I don't know why my face shows up here and then down here and then to the side. So if it's not in the right spot, please just tell me move camera up or down. That's awesome. I love you guys for that. It's helpful. I just don't feel like figuring it out. It's really annoying. Let's fix my screen. Okay. All right. You ready, Brian? Trying to add you here. It should have sent you the invite. Let me try this again. If not, no. Okay. Yep, it says you're already invited, Brian. So I don't know if there's a way on your laptop that's different than your phone. I had the last girl use her phone so that we didn't have to go through this. Sorry, fixing my face and my hair. No, not with Karen Tressler. No. Hi, Lee. How you doing, girl? I don't know. Oh, must be still trying to get set up on here. So anyways, so today I'm going to be talking with Brian from Nodsquad. He formed this podcast a couple years ago and managed to keep it up while actively being in and out of addiction, and now has been clean for I think over a year and has come out of a halfway house and is now kind of acclimating back into the recovery world outside of a halfway house and real life. So he has had a pretty crazy experience. Stay tuned to listen to him. He's actually really, really good and hilarious, and I love his podcast. I did a story on his page not too long ago. So let's see. It says you're on my camera. I should be able to add you at this point. I don't know why it's messing with me. Sorry, guys. You just gotta hang on for a second. There we go. Gotcha. All right. All right. Are you connected?
Hey, yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hey, everybody.
Hi. Okay, so
How's it
anyways,
going?
I don't get like a ton of viewers anymore. Obviously, I'm getting boring to the community, but I will later on. It usually ends up getting at least a couple hundred afterwards. So, um, basically, we're just gonna go through. You tell what you want to tell, what you want to get out there, what parts of your story you think are important. But yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, Brian.
All right, sounds good. So my name is Brian. I go by Unc online. I don't know how I got that name. It was kind of just given to me, and I'm stuck with it. So I've been doing a podcast platforms called Nodsquad, and basically when I started with my co-host at the time, we were just telling crazy war stories, and that's as far as it kind of our aspirations went for it. And over time, trying to run a podcast when you're well, I was in adult drug court at the time, it was quite problematic, document you I was like documenting our relapses and us getting thrown in jail. It became kind of a an eye opener because we didn't really think anyone was going to listen. And then, a year and a half later of recording podcasts, we've been getting contacted by people all over the world. And, through my journey into podcasting, I ended up having a really major overdose and relapse. And I checked myself into a 12-month residential program that I recently graduated out of in April. Did a few months in a sober living, and I've just been, as of present day, I've just been kind of maintaining life and life's responsibilities, with a year of sobriety under my belt, which is just a completely new experience, getting out into the regular world and maintaining a job and putting myself back in college to get my associate's degree and just paying bills, even just going through my mail has been like, for some weird reason, it's like the biggest challenge for me. I had no problem going into Home Depot and stealing power tools to get, a couple points of black tar heroin, but like going through my mail is like the most trivial, unbearable task. Or folding my laundry, just like,
I know.
it's so mind blowing how this is how normal people operate, and I'm so inexperienced with like how people do things in the real world. Um, but I mean, that's just the process. Basically for me is, I was so used to the chaos of running around on the streets that, I wouldn't say mundane life, but regular real life experiences are insane to me. I'm gonna put this phone up somewhere. Put it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, do you want me to go over my story, like my whole story,
Yeah,
or?
tell me about your like childhood and how you grew up.
Okay, so I was born in Los Angeles in '84.
So was my
Um,
boyfriend.
you know, oh, really nice.
Yeah.
So, I mean, anyone knows LA is just an intense city to live in. There's a lot of crime, there's a lot of violence, and my parents were always constantly trying to get us away from that. We would move houses a lot, move to La Crescenta, which is like outside of the city, but in the county still. And then about a year, I was exposed to all kinds of crazy things in my childhood and not really knowing how to process that, as a kid growing up. But about a year before the LA riots in 1990, we moved up north in California to a place called San Luis Obispo. And I think I had immediately centered myself around a circle of friends that would basically become, the stoner druggy crowd. And a lot of growing up was just basically just experimenting with drugs and partying and having very little consequences in my life. Um, for the most part, not catching a lot of arrest charges, but a few, and getting put on probation here and there for very minor stuff. But I'd say, I had very little accountability back when I was, trying cocaine and weed and drinking and driving and just doing all kinds of crazy stuff that, we would be exposed to crazy things like car accidents, and friends of ours would pass away. And that was really, it was emotionally kind of paralyzing dealing with those. But even when you're a teenager and growing up, you still don't process the world. You process it in a different way, I think, than when you're clean and sober and have a few more years of life experience under your belt. But um, I'd say around 2009 is when things took a turn in a way different direction. I had moved back to LA. I was going to a specialty college called Musicians Institute to get my sound engineering certification. I've been playing guitar, playing in bands, doing concerts in LA, promoting concerts. And about 6 months into just my new life in LA, kind of just trying to, start, creative projects and this or that, I had gotten diagnosed with testicular cancer, and that my whole world kind of took a different direction. I all within a week I was diagnosed, rushed in for surgery, and went through a breakup, and I got evicted in Hollywood by my D-list actor roommate. And so it was just like I had to pick up all the pieces and kind of figure out what to do with my life. Now, while I was in, I definitely would say, out of all the drugs I had experimented with, I'd say weed and pain pills were the two that, I had this kind of, other people talk about it like a revolution in your brain where you're like, oh, I want to feel like this all the time. Um, so anytime I could get pills, I would. The problem with at the time is, and right when I'd gotten out of high school, OxyContin was booming. It was just, it was still at the time difficult to get, at least for me, because there was such a high demand and supply chain was low. Doctors were getting busted for, writing bad scripts here and there. So when I was in the, was it the ICU, or right after I got out of surgery, they were putting liquid Dilaudid in my IV, and so that was kind of like my first um, experience with intravenous drug use. And then from then I left the hospital with a bottle of Oxycontins and kind of hit the ground running. I noticed that, the opiates were treating my more of my emotional trauma more than my like
Right.
physical trauma from surgery, because I was 24 at the time, and dealing with cancer, or the realization that I have cancer. I had to drop out of school. I just went through a breakup and got kicked out of my apartment in Hollywood. I had to relocate to Pasadena. It was just a heavy thing at the time, especially you're in your early 20s. You don't know where your life is headed at that point. So I basically, yeah,
Still in
I
my 20s.
yeah, yeah. It was a very overwhelming and paralyzing situation I was in at the time. So I moved to Pasadena, and I was going to a regular community college, kind of just floating and drifting. Yes, I'd started DJing shows and just trying to figure out, like, because I didn't know if I had a year to live or 3 years. I didn't know how serious my cancer was. And so basically, I was just kind of floating around, almost doing what I was doing before I was diagnosed, and pretty much trying any drug that was put in front of me. Um, at that point, I was doing menial jobs here and there, and anytime I could get pain pills, I would. But I still, at the time, I had this weird, um, I don't know, I was on a high horse thinking that, oh, I have it under control. They're just oxys. I'm just popping them or snorting them or this or that. I'm not shooting up. Like, I thought I was higher class because I snort
Uh-huh.
my heroin basically. And it's pharmaceutical grade, so it comes from a doctor. This is like bougie. But over time, um, I I somehow got into the cannabis industry. I was smoking a lot of weed. Was I was like pressured to do chemotherapy by my oncologist, and I just felt weird about how he was trying to sell me chemo. I mean, and I'm not here to say anyone should take chemo or not take chemo, just from my personal experience. He was trying to, I had an MRI scan. There was no cancer in my body from the test post surgery. So I didn't, at the time, I just made the conscious decision for my part. I was like, I'm not going to do 3 rounds of chemo. And I started working in the cannabis industry. Um, you know, Started as a delivery driver, worked my way up to managing 2 dispensaries and running, and I started growing lots of weed and taking Rick Simpson oil. I was just like this silly weed activist at the time that was just thinking, weed is like, I'm just going to smoke weed. That's a solution to all my
Did that
problems.
oil help you? Because
Uh,
I hear that oil does work good for people with cancer, though.
I mean, it it's hard to say whether I noticed so much differences because managing a dispensary and having your owners or vendors bring you so much samples and so much. I was so stoned
Right.
the whole
How would you
time.
even know?
I could, yeah, but I mean, I will say that you know, all I've had, like, as far as treatment was surgery, and I've been cancer free for 11 years. Now, I'm not here to say for sure weed was like the number one factor in that. I was also changing diet and exercise.
Yeah.
So there could be a lot of contributing factors, or it could have been just that the cancer wasn't as serious as I thought it was. I mean, I was definitely stuck in my head thinking, you know, I'm gonna die, or worst case scenario, you know. Um, so from there, I got really, really deep within the union of the weed industry. You know, I was growing at all my apartments, growing in a, you know, a rented out like building. Like it got to the point where I had three cell phones on me, and I was driving around managing two delivery services and helping at a storefront in Venice. And then at night I'd go to Torrance, and I'd be helping in this like 1,000 plant grow op, and then DJing shows at night. So you know, I was working like 12 to 14 hour days, 7 days a week, but I was bringing in like thousands and thousands of dollars every month. And then at night I'd go and party, and that was my life. I think the next turn I took or the next like thing that got thrown in my, you know, the spokes of my life was getting arrested for with just incredibly large amounts of weed. You know, back then, only Proposition 215 had passed in California, so it was cleared for like medicinal use and not recreational use, and it was such a new like legislation that there was this big gray area over a lot of different parts of the bill, which is like, you know, concentrates were a big gray area, especially butane extracted hash oils, because a lot of these places were having like bad ventilation issues, and you know, houses were being like exploding and people were getting third-degree burns. So at around that time, if you were um, you know, your house had a butane hash lab, it was the same charge as a meth lab. Or I would have customers who would leave our store in Venice with some concentrates, and they'd be walking on the beach and get a felony for possession of it. So it was this weird thing. And at the time, it was just this weird dance, you know, like the the stipulations were constantly changing, and I'd gotten pulled over with like a trunk full of inventory. You know, I was going back into town with my girlfriend, and I had all these oils, all these flowers, and I got arrested. They were, you know, interrogating me um, to like snitch on the owner, but I was like, dude, all my permits and everything to operate under the dispenser are in my car. So basically, I had this whole court process for over the year trying to fight this case, and they were attempting to put a felony intent to distribute charge on my record,
Oh,
which sounds like to anybody else like I'm a drug dealer. You know, I had more than just weed on me. So that was, you know, on top of still having to get blood testing for my alpha theta protein levels and my to see if, you know, my health was manageable, and the fear of getting put in jail. You know, I did what I knew best. I leaned to opiates even more, worked my way up like the drug chain, you know, ladder, and found more connects. And, you know, people loved me because I had all this free weed. So I found a guy who could get like Oxy 80s, like the old school ones, all the time. So that was the first moment in my life where I was like actually experiencing more heavy set withdrawals.
right.
Like, I mean, fuck, I was getting like 5 80 milligram Oxycontins for $100 at the time when the people are trying to sell them for 80 a piece. So like my tolerance had bumped up to like 3 to 5 pills a day. You know, wouldn't get out of I would stay in bed until my oxys hit in and I wasn't feeling such bad body aches and stuff. Um, but I eventually ended up getting busted again after a day of covering for a delivery driver, and my Oxy Connect at the time hit me up and was like, "Yeah, I found more old school 80s," and it's like 12 at night. I have three cell phones in my car, like $2,000 in various crumpled up bills in my center console, and I'm thinking, okay, this is great idea. I'm going to be in and out and I'll have my oxys. Well, it turns out I drive past a cop who's watching his house. I get pulled over. Um, yeah, they go through my phones and see all these text messages to delivery drivers like so and so needs an eighth at this address, so and so needs weed at this address, and there's just all this like random currency in my glove box. So uh, in the system I go again. Mind you, I'm on probation for my last charge, and so I'm on. They're perfectly able to search my house. They go storm in my bungalow apartment. Um, all I fuck. I had like $15,000 in various envelopes, all these jars of weed, um, but no weapons. And
But no weapons.
they didn't find, yeah, no weapons, no other. They didn't find any other drugs, which there were drugs there. So I ended up having to call the bail bondsman, get myself released. I go back. The bond place gave me a ride back to my little apartment, which is just trashed. You couldn't even see the floor because everything is just thrown up in the air. But they didn't find my oxys. So I was like, okay, thank God I'm not going to be sick today. So then I made the decision. I'm like, I'm going to taper off pills and try and clean up my life, which was just not fun at all. Like I had like 4 or 5 80s left, and every day I'd try to taper it down half, and I was still really sick. I discovered kratom at the time, and I was trying to use that to help with, you know, various like physical withdrawal symptoms. And then I detoxed, and I was thinking, okay, my life is fine now. I'm on the right track, and now I can kind of figure out what to do next. Uh, which was when I had the bright idea to fly out an ex-girlfriend who was detoxing off heroin in Chicago.
Bad idea.
So I was like, yeah, because she's like, yeah, I'm detoxing off heroin. I told her, well, I know how to detox. You can just detox at my house.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be amazing.
Good time. Wonderful.
So she yeah. Well, she flies out. She smuggles a lot of pain pills to detox off heroin. And, of course, my self-seeking ways, I'm like, yeah, I want on some of those drugs. Like, you're staying at my apartment, you can share. And so those pills ran out eventually. And I ended up, she convinced me I cave with my enabling ways, and we get heroin, and now we're shooting up heroin.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, what a great idea. And so I think I had experimented here and there with shooting up, but it was always, I didn't know how to hit a vein. I didn't know how to register. So by the time I actually learned the whole ritual of it all, and we were there, and I was helping, she had me help like register her vein. It was a god awful nightmare. But then it was like that revelation again, where I was like, oh, this is way better. It was way more instantaneous. Like, pills are way more money. Like, and that just became my life. I had a little bit of money I had saved from the dispensary. My ex, who is now my girlfriend again, she's got like an inheritance fund. So we're just living in my bungalow apartment, and our days just became waking up, being sick for an hour, waiting for our dealer to get on his runs for the day, meeting him somewhere in LA, Griffith Park, or anywhere, and going home and just getting extremely high. And then when I had time, go to court, deal with all these felonies that I'm like building up against myself, and then trying to appease the judge if I could, doing community service when I could. But shooting up in I was literally like shooting up in the porta potties for Caltrans in between,
right,
trying to get community service done. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, it always is.
So I think around that time, I'd finished community service, and I had some money like left over, and I was like, I need to get out of LA and get my legal situation on track. So I whatever money I had left, I gave to my parents and said, I need to move back up here and deal with if I'm going to go to jail or not. And they told me, yeah, that's fine, but your girlfriend can't come. And so I was like, yeah, that's fine. But I sneak her up anyway. And she's, at this point, she's like hiding in my fucking closet in my room. And we're still like, we moved back up north with a pretty hefty dope habit. We were getting China White at this point, which I'm sure had fentanyl in it. So our tolerance is through the roof. And um, when we're sick, we feel it.
Right.
So at the time, yeah, we had moved up and we were like, all right, we're going to do, how people say, oh yeah, I'm going to do this last bag and then I'm going to dry out. It never really
Right.
ends that well. So I ended up, we moved back up and we tried to get into a methadone program, like one of the 4 times I've done methadone. And we have to wait like an extra day or two to like meet with the doctor to get a dose of methadone. So those 2 days were like some of the worst withdrawal I ever felt. To the point where like we couldn't wait the 2 days or even one day to like get a dose of methadone. We had to drive back down to LA, get a front on like a half tank of gas, just like driving, thinking like not knowing if we're going to run out of gas. I was so in such bad withdrawal, I could barely keep my hands on the steering wheel. Um, and then getting well, which took like multiple tries, and then figuring out how we're going to get gas to get back up north. It was just insane. So, I mean, from that point, a lot of it just, it entered this crazy territory where I'm either detoxing, getting clean for a few months, or relapsing and then getting back into a sick run and getting arrested for some petty possession charge or just all these you know, little charges here and there until finally the previous court cases for the whole dispensary raid and everything hit me with, I think they charged me with 180 days in LA County Jail at Twin Towers. So I had to turn myself in, you know, do a one last shot because I know I'm going to be sick in jail and do like heavier like time than I was accustomed to before. In Twin Towers, I wouldn't say it's the worst jail or out there, but you definitely are exposed to some like grimy like shit. There's a lot of fights. There's a lot of drugs in that jail, and a lot of people just scheming or just talking about ways to break laws. And it's basically criminal college. I learned how to break a lot more laws when I was in there than you know, when before. And I was doing meth in there. I was smoking weed, smoking cigarettes, taking any pills I could. I have some crazy jail stories. But then I had gotten out and went back up north. By this time, my girlfriend's no longer in the picture. She's back in Chicago. And that's when, for my previous possession charges, I got put on adult drug court. Um, and I had met what would be my co-host for Nodsquad, who was my friend Ryan. We had met in jail. I got busted on some. I was like trying to cash like shady checks and got pulled over speeding, and they found a gram of heroin on me, and I'm on probation, so I'm immediately thrown back in jail, and I'm trying to get out because I have a job at like a college. Oh yeah, just right out of the playbook,
I know.
And so I go in there and I'm gearing up to be sick in jail again, just like all the other times. And my bunkie next to me, he's super skinny and he's got this abscess on his calf that looks like it just god awful. And he's like saying, "Oh no, it's a spider bite. It's a spider bite." But so I knew I was gonna connect with this guy right away. And he turns out becoming one of my best friends, and we both get released. Both get put on drug court. And I don't know if people know a lot about drug court, but it's one of the strictest, it's like one of the most intense court ordered drug programs there are. Like the fallout rate is incredible. A lot of people get kicked out and dealt their maximum sentence anyway.
Yep.
So, um, here's a funny story. So, one day in this program, they had these things called mandatory fundraisers where we'd go on like a little outing with everyone in drug court. Either go to the park or a baseball game. And in this particular moment, we were going to play miniature golf. And so I pick up a bunch of people from drug court. By this time, I'm dating another girl who is still getting loaded, shooting up in front of me, cheating on me, and I'm trying to stay clean. So I'm in this weird space where I'm like taking kratom religiously to like get rid of cravings and not trying to be around my girlfriend because I don't like the last thing I need to see is someone shoot up in front of me when I'm trying to stay clean. But I get a bunch of friends, pick them up, and I got a bunch of kratom in the car, and we're driving to this miniature golf course to go to this mandatory fundraiser, and we're stuck in traffic, and we're like, fuck, if we're late, we're gonna get like a sanction because their punishment system in drug court is like if you're late for a meeting or late for that, you get a 2-day sanction, which is like 48 hours in a holding cell. You don't get housed. It's not fun. So I'm sitting there, and two of our friends in drug court race past us on their motorcycles, and then like 6 cop cars are chasing them with sirens on. And so we're witnessing a high-speed pursuit with our friends in drug court while we're going to this mandatory fundraiser. I get there, everyone's asking me for kratom, so I'm feeding people kratom. Everyone's loaded on kratom. It was like, from what our counselor said, the worst day in drug court history. The cops showed up. Yeah, the cops literally like swarmed the miniature golf course looking for our friends who were like on the run. We just witnessed them running from cops. And I saw my friend Ryan in the parking lot after all this goes on, and he's like, dude, we should start a podcast and tell all our crazy stories. After that insane story had already happened, and we're like, yeah, we'll call it Nodsquad. I mean, by that point, I had little knowledge or anything about recovery, and I was just like, I have crazy stories, and let's just put them out there. Our first intention was to get them recorded and then animate the stories into cartoons, which we still have yet. I mean, I wouldn't even know how to tackle that with YouTube guidelines, and like, I mean, it would probably just get demonetized or taken down in the first place. So we decided to start with a podcast, and the first few episodes, we were too paranoid to even release them because our counselors were monitoring us and watching pretty much everything we did. So we had like 8 episodes recorded, and throughout that, for the most part, we're doing good. My co-host and I are working at a restaurant together. I'm in the back doing prep cook stuff. He's a server, and it was about 3 years ago during Thanksgiving, and we had kind of gotten used to the routine of color drug testing. I don't know if everyone knows about that, but you basically call you're assigned a color, and if it gets called, you have to go in and test during certain hours of the day. So, but if it's during, if a holiday lies on a Friday or a Monday, that's like 3 days. You don't get tested, which was like the perfect window for us to think, yeah, we can get a dose in, or we can get a shot in and test clean on a Monday. And so we basically both made the conscious decision to relapse on a Friday. And we got off work. By this time, I'm shooting up mixed shots. I'm shooting up coke and heroin, meth and heroin. By this time, anything I can put into a syringe and inject, that's my route of administration. Because I know for myself, I didn't just fall in love with the euphoria, but I fell in love with the ritual. I fell in love with putting a needle in my arm, which like now,
crazy.
that I say that, I'm like, wow,
Right.
that's
It sounds like
morbid and
it.
dark. Like, yeah, like holy shit, that's what my life became. And for a while, like I was able to get one over on them. I'd I'd keep drugs. By this time I'm back. I had gotten fired from my job and I'm back in college and I'm in drug court. So I'm like, okay, well, I have the accountability. I have to, not do drugs, but I can sell them. And I'm around all these college kids who are like, hey, you got any acid? You got any mushrooms? So I literally would buy all these drugs to keep them in a lockbox in my storage unit to keep them like away from myself. And I'm selling all these drugs thinking I have my shit together somehow. Um, so I had accumulated all these drugs. And so me and my friend Ryan, we relapse. I put down the drugs and lock them away from myself, and he doesn't. He ends up getting like dilutes on his tests or not even showing up for testing. And a warrant gets put out on his arrest. A warrant gets put out for his arrest, and he goes on the run. Leaves his job and is hiding in like an undisclosed location. Now, mind you, we're still podcasting, so I would do phone interviews with him for the podcast, and he'd be held up in some hidden location, and he would be like, during a phone interview, I'd be cleaning, and he'd be like, "Oh, I need to go cook up a shot right now." So there's literally episodes where my co-host is like getting loaded while we're on the air, and
Right.
it yeah, and I think back then, there'd be times I'd be either loaded or be dope stick, and I'd try to open up about it, um, or it was just like I think those early episodes really portray the struggling life of someone in early recovery who doesn't really have that solid foundation for knowing how to, you know, bob and weave through life without getting high as a reactionary result to like
Any,
all the real life responsibilities we have to deal with.
yeah.
So I think, yeah, around that time, me and my friends convinced my friend to turn himself in, and the courts ordered him to go to a inpatient facility, which later on became the facility I went to. It was a 12-month program, and it seemed like the best option for him at the time. So he goes to rehab. I'm still in drug court. We recorded these episodes, haven't released them, but as soon as I graduate drug court, uh, it just took another level of intensity for my life. I remember going in the courthouse, getting my certification for completion, leaving in like a nice suit, driving to my storage unit, taking off my tie, and using it to tie off a goofball. Like the moments, like the soonest I could shoot up after drug. I don't even know how I graduated that program, honestly.
It's a hard program.
Um,
Very hard program.
oh yeah, and I saw so many people get kicked out left and
Yeah,
right.
we did too.
And I had this whole system where it's like if I knew I was going to be dirty, I wouldn't show up for a test because a no show gets less sanction time than a dirty test, and I didn't want to get kicked out. But they were definitely on to me. But I get out and I just go back to my old ways. There'd be days I could hold down a couple weeks of clean time. I mean, I'm smoking weed or taking kratom, but then I'd get back in the rat race of things. And by then, my life had just I could see how incrementally worse and worse it was getting. Like, I walked out on my job and I was just had no purpose or no direction or no goals. My goal was basically just getting strung out. And at that point, my tolerance was at the point where I was like, that was the only thing on my mind was not being sick and thinking when I'm loaded, I'm so productive, but I'm really just pacing back in my room, like digging up thinking I'm cleaning my room, but then it becomes more of a mess than before. Just being out of my mind,
Amen.
you know. I think when I added methamphetamines to the mix, the psychosis started coming in. I started not thinking correctly, you know, and then I had experienced one of my many
Hurry up, go.
overdoses where I basically I fell out. I overdosed in my house I was living in, and it took 4 bottles of naloxone to bring me back.
Oh wow.
You know, yeah, it was out of all my overdoses, that was the scariest one. Um, I was letting my dealer like basically trap out of my parents' house while they're on vacation in DC, and we're basically just getting high all the time. He walks in my room and I'm just laid out on the ground. I'm foaming at the mouth, and I'm not. I mean, who knows how long I wasn't breathing for, but he even told me he told me like moments after I got brought back that God, what did he say? He's like, I almost just deleted our text messages and our contacts and just left you for dead. But thank God he ended up calling another junkie in our local scene who just is known for going around hitting people with Narcan, and texted him saying, my friend, he's dead, he's dead. He rushes over, and yeah, I still have those 4 bottles of naloxone I keep as like a memento, like that. It was so like the experience was so fast, it faded to black so fast, and then I'm like gasping for air, like realizing I'm on the floor, like naked and wet because they held me under a shower and were like hitting me in the face and pouring cold water on me, and being in that just crazy withdrawal and shivering and like that confusion and like the tunnel vision. It was really traumatic. Um, and at that point, I had realized, amongst all the other things I had experienced, there was so many other moments that I'm not even at liberty to talk about on my podcast, like just very incriminating things or very traumatic things that I went through that I'm still like healing from. Mm-hmm. So at that point, I opened up about my overdose a little bit on the podcast. Dave from Dopey had reached out, had me on his podcast, and he was there for support. And all loved ones in my life had convinced me to check into inpatient. I was basically I basically went to the same treatment. I went to I went to the same treatment facility that my co-host Ryan went to, because I was hearing the best things about it, and I looked at it as like a 12-month sabbatical to kind of assess my life, who I am as a person, and try and fix as many broken pieces of me as I could to like get back on my feet. So while I was in the treatment facility, I was still trying to maintain the podcast. And so that's what I did. I had a bunch of old recordings. I had a bunch of new friends I made in rehab, and I ordered a portable mic, and we went about continuing to release episodes. So Nodsquad basically evolved into kind of documenting my progress in recovery, which was never our sole intention. It was just usually strictly war stories, and it was kind of a nihilist attitude. We didn't have any hope or aspirations for anything other than just telling war stories. And then from it's kind of just shown the progress I've made to where I am today. And so, I mean, in a nutshell, that's kind of like the short version of my life. But there was just so many moments in between there with me realizing all these different aspects of my life, like my codependency issues, or my ability to not set healthy boundaries, or the toxic relationships I've had in the past, and how all those things attributed to me using drugs as a coping mechanism to avoid uncomfortable feelings, uncomfortable situations. That's basically what I've done this last year. And so now I'm in a weird adjusting and self-discovery period where it's like, okay, I just got my own apartment for the first time in like the longest time, and I'm working full time and going to school, and I'm realizing all these different aspects of my life that I mean, on a daily basis need to be addressed or processed, like situations, did I handle that in the correct way? What's my relationship with these people? Or dealing with old friends who are still struggling, and how to set healthy boundaries with them and still be there for them, but have a safe distance to keep me safe. Or, keeping committed to going to meetings and having a support group around me that's positive. Just all these different things and discovering who I am now as opposed to who I was when I first started the podcast, and what goals I want and how much time I need to allocate to them, and not burning myself out with school and just like, so that's basically where I am today. Um, I don't know if that makes sense or
It does.
to
It
anyone,
does.
but so it's been surreal, you know. I think self-identity is a huge issue people struggle with when they get out of rehab or get clean. They don't really they a lot of I mean, I felt a little lost when I first got out of rehab and I'm sitting in sober living. I'm like, well, okay, who am I? Who do I want to be? What goals do I have? What do I even want to do with my life? Because before I that's the last thing on my mind.
Right.
My life was so much of projecting outwardly, blaming every institution and everything and everyone else for the problems I have in my life, and just throwing my arms up and giving up and saying, well, fuck it, I'm going to stick a needle in my arm.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it's it's just so much different. It's like, well, what am I able to do about the situation that's in my control? What is a situation that's completely out of my control that I shouldn't get worked up over and have some kind of acceptance towards, and like staying out of my head. Like, my perception is that can be my worst enemy at times.
Mm-hmm.
Especially my initial emotional response to things
Wrong.
can be my
Right.
downfall. Yeah, exactly. So I'm learning about contrary action and not isolating too much or getting uncomfortable. Um, and it's such a new and foreign experience to me. Um, it's it's challenging, especially, I mean, not to mention, getting clean and sober in general and re-entering society is a challenge itself. But I picked like the worst year
Yeah,
to get
it
clean with all this shit
did.
going on. You know, it was one thing where like my life was chaos, but everyone around me had their shit together. I at least was like, okay, there's opportunities, there's this and that. But getting clean and then entering the real world, and the whole fucking world is like in
I
flames.
know.
It's like, some people say like, oh, well, at least we're all going through it together. But it's like, dude, like, when you see people who never had an addiction problem and they're freaking out over shit, or when you see people with more clean time than you go back out,
Mm-hmm.
relapse, and then they're dead 2 3 weeks later. Or, I've had a lot of people reach out to me through social media, emails or anything, who are just struggling. They're having trouble getting into a detox or a treatment facility. Some of these places, they require um, a COVID test to show that they're not infected to even get in. And if they don't have the money for that, or if they don't have insurance or anything, they're just fucked. And so it's been a real eye opener. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, just seeing how fast things can like switch up, not just for me but for everybody.
I know.
So sorry for that rant, but that's just basically what's been on my mind lately. you know um, Seeing the relapse rates just
Rocket.
skyrocket.
I know, man. They're high. They're really high.
Yeah, and overdose rates are up. Sometimes I sit back and I wonder like how I'm even like doing as well as I am, like,
I
because
know.
there are days that are just paralyzing. And so I've been learning tools or finding out ways to just maintain my own sanity. you know like right now, staying keep like not being too in social media or too in like watching too much news, or doing things like that, or have been a huge relief of stress. And I've just been trying to keep my head down and get through school and do work, because it's like I I know that these next few years are going to be a challenge to get. It's like I'm on my feet, like it's okay, I'm making money, I'm saving bills, but um I know that there's going to be something next in my life, or a next challenge or a next hurdle
Oh,
that I'm gonna have to take care of.
Mm.
You know, I think the biggest thing that caused my last relapse was when, my dad, or seeing my parents' health slowly, not, I wouldn't say deteriorate, but seeing that my parents' health slowly get more serious was a huge contributing factor to my last relapse, and not knowing how to handle, the inevitable moment in my future where I'm going to have to bury my parents was a huge, overwhelming like thing to think about and prepare myself for. And then, at the time, my youngest sister had a forced, or she had a miscarriage. The baby inside of her womb, it's like organs were forming outside of the baby's body, and so after all this testing, they had come to the conclusion they had to terminate the pregnancy because the infant would not survive childbirth. And seeing her go through that, and seeing, and like thinking all these things about my life, I did like what I knew was best, which is tapping out, running away from my problems, and numbing out over it, which, you know, in hindsight made all my situations worse.
Right.
So yeah, it's like it's crazy how a year of sobriety, like you were like, oh yeah, that's just I did everything wrong basically. And now that I'm clean, I'm like, it seems so much more simple. But I mean, now it just shows how powerful the like drugs are, especially when you cook them up and inject them into fucking your veins. Like it's just so insane looking back, and accepting that I let my life go that far downhill. Um, so now I guess the only thing I can do now is to be there for people that ask for my help, and make amends to the loved ones I hurt in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to take care of my parents if they need help with anything, or reaching out to people who are struggling, and doing the next right thing as much as possible. But then also knowing when I have to like take
Let it go.
self-care
Yeah.
for my own.
Put
Yeah.
yourself
Or how to.
first.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird transition where you get out of rehab and you have all your old friends, whether they're in town or not, and they may reach out to you, and you have to have a new kind of communication with people that are still using drugs, or this or that, because it's scary. I still get using dreams. I
Oh,
still
I do too.
uh yeah, I still wake up. Like I had one just the other day where like someone like my dad walked into my bathroom in my dream, and there's a needle laying out, and then I have to see the look on his face. I'm just like, oh. Like, I know the road ahead of me, it's got some time on it to do more healing. It's not like you do a year in rehab or get a year clean and now you're just fixed. Like, it's a daily maintenance thing I have to work on. So that's why I think having a support group, and having people you feel comfortable reaching out to and getting vulnerable about, is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen so many people isolate. I've seen so many people, avoid uncomfortable experiences, and then I've seen so many people go out over it, whether it's living in fear of the future, or living in regret from the past, or feeling lost in the present. You know, um, so it's been mind blowing, basically, to say the least. And you know, as far as my co-host, I still don't know where he is. He had gone through a relapse while I was in rehab. So it seems like, you know, the shape of the podcast that we made, it never played out in the ways we thought it would. But I mean, we were relapsing all the time. So
Why would it? Right.
now yeah. So now that it is where it is now, it's interesting to see the turns it took. And now I don't try to make it like an all recovery based podcast, and it's up in the air, where I'm trying to figure out what Nodsquad will be or become.
I mean,
Because I'm not trying
if
to.
you need another co-host, I would love to help, but you
Oh,
could do
you
a
would be
lot of
perfect.
things for this man. I'm serious about that. But I mean, you guys could really like. That's the thing is like I try to not make everything about recovery too, because recovery is great and all, and it's a wonderful subject. But when we get too surrounded in recovery, we start to lose our own identity as well. So it's okay to look back on
Yeah.
those things and talk about your experiences. I think you could talk about a lot of things on your show. You could do a lot of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been, I think, and I just recorded an episode today and I touch on this where it's like I'm still discovering who I am now. And it's like I know some people come there because like we want to hear the war stories, and some people the the war stories are maybe too triggering for them now, or some people are not in recovery and that's all they want to hear. Or some people are like, I don't want to hear how preachy you get with the recovery. So that's always been a balance. But at the same time, for myself, it's like I want to make content that people enjoy, but I also don't want to burn myself out doing it, where I'm like constantly talking about war stories, constantly talking about drugs. Because I can get burnt out on that just as much as maybe the listeners could
Oh,
be.
100%.
And and not only that, but it's like whereas before I had all this free time, I had more free time because I was basically, you know, living off the dime I made months before and getting strung out,
Right.
or just laying in a bed detoxing with a mic against my
Right.
head,
Talk
or
phone and doing or doing your
yeah,
right.
or I'm in rehab with way more free time and interviewing all my friends around me and them telling their stories. Where it's like now it's like, dude, I've worked 40 plus hours a week. I'm doing like at least half time in school, and I'm trying to like figure my life out and somehow make a podcast every week. So it comes to a point where it's like I want to not rush content out and maintain some kind of quality over it, than just quantity.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's been a very profound experience with everything. I didn't think my life would go in the directions it has, and a lot of my life was reacting to situations on an emotional level with using substances, and like not holding any accountability and just being like, well, this is my life. Was dealt some shitty hands and now I get loaded every day. And so now, after years and years of having that like kind of just built in the muscle memory of my brain, it's like every day I have to step outside of that perception and correct myself and be like, instead of looking at all the reasons why my life sucks, let's look at the fact that you're paying rent every month. At the end of the month you have a good amount of money in the bank to save up,
Mm-hmm.
and that having gratitude, like fuck it, that in itself
One of
is
the
like
biggest parts.
new. Yeah. So um and that's why I think, at least for myself, having meetings, even if it's just a Zoom meeting or a support group of friends in recovery around me, is so necessary to remind me that, or friends who will just call me out on my
Right.
bullshit when my character defects creep back in, and I'm like trying to find people to validate my bullshit. I need friends that will tell me the contrary and be like, your ego's is creeping in here, or that. Um, yeah, it's just been, and so it's like, yeah, I have like 14 months clean coming up, and that's great. But it's like, I also realize how quickly all that clean time can just go right out the
Yep.
window, you know? And it's usually not like you're doing great and then one day you're just, oh, I'm going to pick up a needle and start using, or I'm going to do this. It's like there are all these little things that happen in between that process, or situations you could have handled better, or relationships or friendships you need to address, or all these, the way you perceive people you work with, or resentments and stuff. It's like that usually all manifests into an opportunity where you're presented drugs, and how I hate saying this way because I'm kind of agnostic, but it's like how spiritually fit you are at the moment
Mm-hmm.
that opportunity presents itself is really the deciding factor of where your life is going to turn from that moment
Yeah.
on. I think a lot of one of the biggest things I had to come to terms with was my current situation or current status in life was built around all the life decisions and choices I made up to that point. And a lot of those choices or decisions I made were based on where I was perception wise and like emotionally, and like where my mind, like how my mind perceived my life was the deciding factor of what I would do that ended me in the situation where I'm at. So I know that in itself can take a lot of people out in the form of regret, where people are like, oh, I did spend all these years fucking up,
Right.
like, and it's going to take, I think they realize all the work that is required of them to pull themselves out of it. It's not just rehab. Rehab is like
Tipping.
the training wheels that helps you. Yeah.
Right.
Like I thought life was hard in rehab. I had no idea until I
I
was
know,
out in the
isn't
real
that the
world. I was like,
funny
oh,
part?
I was like, this is how people deal. This is how normal people deal with
I got
everything.
some
Like, how do they
laundry.
do
I
it?
gotta pick up after myself. I gotta get up after before 8 o'clock. I gotta work.
We gotta wash the dishes. Yeah, I gotta do all this.
Then they're
Yeah.
always
So,
rehab about it. Like, I just want to go out in the free world and have my own place. And they get out there and
and then they
they
do.
hate it. They relapse,
There's
or they go off the grid, or they lose their house within like a month because they don't know how to do it. You know.
there's a price to pay when it comes to those responsibilities. If you want all those nice things, you have to work hard towards it. And so for me, it's like it's being comfortable where I'm at in life now, and knowing that what is going to be required of me to take that next, like, advancement, where I get a better job or I get my associate's degree. I'm realizing like it's okay to be where I'm at in life now, as long as I'm working towards something better in the future. And I know life is going to come at me in so many different ways from this moment on. I know, um, right now, at least, the cards that are dealt to me right now, it's manageable.
Mm-hmm.
And that the real thing that it takes is time and hard work. It's being proactive and motivated about getting, I hate saying this because it's so cliche, but dealing with life on life's terms, and just doing it. Like I think I was so used to the instant gratification of getting high, and I equated that like dopamine rush with like being happy where I was in my life when it was in shambles. That I know I get out of rehab, and I think subconsciously I was thinking, oh well, my life should be like amazing now. I should be like rich and a star, or I have all these expectations, and it's like that just I'm gonna let myself down if I have all these expectations. So for me, it's being comfortable with like, okay, I'm working this job, I'm making this amount of money, this is good, and I know this amount of time and this amount of work is required for me to get somewhere better, you know. So yeah, that's basically how I feel at this point in life. And things will probably change in the future, and I know I'm change as a person. I know I'm gonna make mistakes along the way. No one does this thing perfectly. Um, and as long as I can learn or extract life lessons from those experiences, I'll feel a lot more better about that than if I just went and said, "Fuck it, I'm gonna go get loaded over
Right.
this," you know. So, man, that sorry,
That's all
I
right.
could catch my
I'm
breath
sweating over
after all
here.
that
I'm on
talking.
3%, so I'm just hoping it's not gonna die on you. I'm like, all right,
Oh, you're on
I'm
3%.
watching. Like, are we counting down here? But yeah, I mean, you've definitely had like a really testing lifestyle, I think, throughout your life that has made you were so accustomed to that for so long that for you to kind of break that cycle is so self-identifying. Like, it just puts us into perspective. And like, I think that we all have cycles in our lives that maybe every 27 years, every like 10, 12 years, like I am a spiritual person. But I think in these cycles, like if we either identify and move forward or we don't. And I think that you broke like your cycle for now. You just have to stay on that. And we're made up a lot of different things. You know, next year you might be in a different headspace where this looks like nothing comparative to next year. We change, we modify, we become better people. And eventually we take that piece of addiction that was with us and we bring it with us into the future, but we don't let it destroy us or change who we are completely. You know, we're allowed to be that old person we were, the good parts, but we just have to pick and choose and kind of become the person we've been wanting to become our whole life, or what we look up to and what we want to stand for and who we want to be. Because I know a lot of us like are really lost. I was really lost. I remember like not even really. I was so stuck in my identity as a user, as a gangster, that I didn't like the new me. The new me was too sober, too good. And it used to bother me when people would be like, they would vote me the girl to save the earth, the girl that would want to help everybody. And it almost used to piss me off. I'm like, that's not me. No, I shot a lot of drugs and I robbed people. And they're like, Brady, that's not you, honey. Like, you're just not, you don't even steal a pen off the desk unless it's by accident. You know what I mean? So, like, it's okay for
Yeah.
us to go into this new life, like, knowing we're not the same people and then know that we're also that person was in there. We just couldn't really find it yet. But no, this has been a great testimony. You guys definitely need to check him out. Check out his podcast. It's really great. I did a video, or I did a podcast on there about my life as well. That was pretty intricate and long too. So you guys can appreciate that. This has been a really good interview. I'm gonna share it on Breaking Chains. I'll probably do a watch party in like an hour or two, and another one tomorrow. But we'll definitely check back and keep in touch, and we'll do a couple more of these as the summer goes on. Gonna try to meet people in person, do a couple more in person ones too. But I think you did a great job. You really did.
Thank you. It was a pleasure coming on. I had a blast when having you on. I'm sorry about all the technical
It was fun.
difficulties that I dealt
It
with.
was great.
Um, I'm glad we were able to salvage the recording and have you on because I've I was really thankful. I was brought to attention with your live streams and what you're doing. You definitely said a lot of things over the time I've spent viewing your content that have helped me. You know, even if just to get out of my own head. And I think the way you speak about recovery, it's on a very personal level, and you have a lot of profound things that people can relate to. So definitely thank you for that. And if anyone wants to hear our silly podcast, you can check it out. It's called Nodsquad. It's on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play Music, or on social media. They can check out Nodsquad podcast or my troll account, Brian on Galbert, or email nodsquadpodcast@gmail.com. If anyone wants to reach out, I'd love to have a conversation with any of you. And just know that you're not alone in this. You know, we all I mean, sometimes I definitely don't show it, but there's times I'm emotionally going through it just as much as everyone else out there.
Mm-hmm.
So having that connection with people and having a discussion with them it helps me just as much as it helps anyone out there. So I just appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Yeah, you never know. You could be somebody's lifeline. All right, I'm on 1%. I love you guys. I'm going to share this. All right, I will keep in touch. All right. Please share his story.
All right.
Get it out there. Thank you guys. I love you all. I love your support. If you want to come on, let me know. If you want to go on his show, have a conversation with him. Thank you and have a wonderful day. I love you all.